Hey guys, welcome back to How's It Doing Garage. Today, we have your grandpa's car in the shop. 1988 Caprice Classic. 4-door, super low miles. This guy was like a referral from a friend of mine. He just needs some general mechanic stuff done to his front brakes. He's got a busted wheel stud in the rear. We got to replace that. He had another shop put a motor in it recently, and they just need that last 5% done. The HVAC blend door's not working. I believe it's a vacuum issue. Runs a little rough. So we're just going to go through it, figure everything out, and get it tip top for the gentleman. So yeah, let's get after it. All right, so one of the complaints this guy had was after he got the motor swapped over, I guess this car had like a 305 in it, and yeah, this is 5 liter, and he said he got a crate 350 put in it from a shop not far from here, and ever since he got it back, the air conditioning hasn't been working. Well, I tested it and the air is working, everything's pressurized and it's coming on. It's just not getting very cold, and it's only working on defrost and floor. It's not, actual AC's not working. So on these old cars, the HVAC all runs off vacuum. So all the blend doors are vacuum actuated. So if you lose vacuum on your HVAC system, it just goes to default, which is defrost. So, when he told me it just worked on defrost, I immediately knew that there's some kind of vacuum leak on the HVAC somewhere. And almost immediately I found it. It's right here. It's a little vacuum hose that's cracked. I'm guessing they probably just got a little crazy with the motor swap. And this will cause your blend doors to quit working almost immediately. So we'll fix that, get a piece of vacuum hose in there, repair that. And then what I'm actually going to do is vacuum down the system and measure how much refrigerant's actually in the system, and then recharge it with the appropriate amount of Freon, which is 3.5 pounds. So we'll put 3.5 pounds back in it, fix that vacuum leak, and see where we're at, and then move on to it looks like it's got an Edelbrock carb on it. Move on to checking the timing, just make sure the timing's good, and then we'll start tuning the carburetor and see if we can get it to run a little bit better. So yeah, so what it is, I cut out the little broken piece of vacuum hard line, I guess you call it, and I've cut another piece of vacuum hose and slid it on here, and then we're just slide it on the other side. Sometimes this line gets pretty brittle from heat, but this car has got like no miles on it, so everything in here is pretty brand new still. So
what year is this car?
It's 88. So and that's it. So that vacuum leak's repaired. I'm gonna fire it up real quick and just check and make sure that everything's working as far as the vents.
This is a minty fresh.
Yeah.
Ooh, really? Bayside breeze.
Yeah, so we turn the air conditioning to max. Yeah, there it goes. So this car does have a pretty giant cam in it. I mean, I guess I wouldn't really say giant, but it's had a pretty substantial camshaft in it. So it's probably not going to work out going highway speed down the road anyway. But yeah, it's working pretty good now. So it's actually pretty cold too.
Yeah.
So
Cool.
yeah. So that was repair number 1. So next thing we're going to do is we're going to check the timing and just make sure that the timing is good on this before we go to do any kind of tuning or anything like that. Because if your timing's off and you're trying to tune up, you're just wasting time. So.
Is that like a dad joke?
Yeah.
Hmm.
Now this gentleman was complaining about when he was in traffic, and he'd go to pull out in front of, you know, cars or what have you, it would backfire out of the carburetor. So yeah, and it's really doggy. You know, when you hit the throttle, it's not very responsive. So, which leads me to believe the timing's off a little bit here. But I'm gonna grab my timing light. Actually, I don't even see a timing mark on this. Which this motor's new, so if the shop put it in, oh yeah, there's not even a timing mark on this engine. So I don't know how whoever put it in, I don't know how they've timed this thing, because there's not even a timing tab on the engine. So I don't know what to do. So one, you know, we said we're going to check the timing, and we've noticed that there is no actual timing tab on the timing chain cover where it normally is. So this gentleman just had this motor put in this car by another shop down the road, and honestly, I don't know if he wants me to tear the whole front of this engine off and put a timing tab on it and check the timing on this engine, but I'm going to go ahead and opt out of this part of his suggested, you know, repair, and encourage him to take it back to the shop and have him, you know, fix that. Because there isn't really a way to check timing on a small block without a timing tab. So, yeah. So I'm not sure how they timed the car in the first place after they've actually put it in the engine. So I'm not sure how they've actually timed the engine since they put it in the car. So I'm going to encourage him to take this back for a little bit of warranty work. So, and it's got, I mean, he said he's barely driven a couple tanks of gas out of this car since he got the engine in, and you could see there's an awful lot of extra fuel in the carburetor already. And you know, this thing's got like 0 miles on it. I think this car in general has only got like 60,000 miles on the whole car. So, and he just had the motor put in. So yeah, we fixed the air conditioning. I'm gonna move on. We're gonna throw some front brake pads on it for him and fix a wheel stud. And he wrote me a list. I'll see what else is on the list. But yeah. All right, so I've got another small block that we've just had laying around the shop, and I was going to show you what the timing tab is and why it's important that it's not there. So this is your harmonic balancer, and then this is your timing tab. So the timing tab has numbers on it, 0, 4, 8, 12. So that's the degrees of timing that for the motor. So this little notch in your balancer, when you have your timing light set up, your timing light will hook to the number 1 cylinder, and then when you hold the trigger down, it'll flash light at the timing tab, and every time it flashes light, it'll show you what degrees of timing you have in your engine. Most stock engines run like 8 to 12 degrees of timing, nothing crazy. So you know, you kind of want to shoot in there. So without this being on the car and you being able to like see where the timing is at, you're basically just gonna be turning the distributor around until it runs good, or you know, runs bad or whatever, and then you just kind of get it in the middle. And that's not really a good way to do it, because you know, you could have issues with your carburetor, could not be tuned right, and then when you turn in the distributor, it's just like mimicking different kinds of drivability. So like without this and actually knowing what you're working against, if it's a crappy carburetor tune or a crappy ignition tune or whatever, you know, you can't, it's just, you just be chasing your tail. So yeah, that's I don't know how they put the car together without a tab on it. I don't know if maybe the tab, I don't know, maybe they set the timing or whatever and took the tab off. I don't know. But
is that normal?
No.
Okay.
Because you could take the whole front of the water pumps on here, you know, you got your pulleys and everything on here, so you'd have to, you know, put all that together, set the timing, and then take it all off, take the timing tab off. I don't know. It's weird that it's not on there, I'll tell you that. One thing we gotta fix is this broken stud. So
Wonk, wonk, wonk.
yeah, it looks like it's a 7/16 stud. I think it looks like. No, we'll see. Looks like we're gonna have to fix 2 studs. Golly, what the heck?
Well, we broke one.
This drum's savable, the other drum's junk. The other drum's got big old grooves in it. So other than 3, I might as well just put 5 wheel studs in here. The brakes on this unit are pretty roached. It's down to the rivets down here on these shoes. So, and then the drum is pretty chewed up as well. So I don't see any leaking coming out of the wheel cylinder. So what I'm gonna do, and the hardware looks okay, is I'm just gonna call and get some new shoes and new drums. And then the front, I took the front apart, so I'll probably put new rotors, pads, wheel bearings, and wheel seals on the front because they're pretty grooved up as well. So I'm getting this car, I mean, you can tell the car's kind of surface rusty, you know, it's been sitting a lot. So I'm pretty sure what happened was on the front is it just got rusty from sitting, and then you drive it and then all that rust just kind of grooves up the rotors. So yeah, we'll just put all new brakes on this unit. All right, so we're back on the rear brakes. I've got all the wheel studs replaced. I broke 3 of them, so I just replaced them all. I'm sure they make a fancy tool for pressing in and pressing out studs. I usually just, when I buy my studs at the auto parts store, I get a couple extra generic lug nuts and use like a 1 size bigger nut, and then I just pull the stud on. They usually pull in really easy. If you're having trouble pulling your stud in, you've probably got the wrong stud. So, which if you spend a decent amount of time around automobiles, you'll know that sometimes when you go to get studs, it's kind of a pain. It's like some kind of taboo. It's like most of the time they can't find the right one. But anyway, so got those done. Right now I'm going to take off all these brakes and clean this backing pad up, and then prep for all the new brakes. We've got all new brakes over on the table. So I'm going to get all this old stuff removed, and then yeah. So most of this hardware on here it's pretty okay looking. Should be able to reuse this no problem. Most of the time I just buy all new hardware. But I kind of gauge, like when customers want me to do stuff to their vehicles, I kind of gauge on where they want to spend their money when I have conversations with them. And this guy was, you know, every other word out of his mouth was, how much is this going to cost? How much does this cost? So, like when that happens, usually I don't try to. Just pull my beard. I don't try to spend a bunch of his money on stuff that he doesn't really need. If this was my car, I would absolutely just replace all this hardware. But yes, it is pretty chewed up. It's down to the rivets. This one's even worse. Pretty gnarly. Another thing you notice whenever you take disc brakes apart, or drum brakes, sorry, I don't see a lot of guys doing this. I'm sure it's probably common practice in more like the, repair world. But you'll see on this backing plate, there's different spots on here where them brake shoes rub on this backing plate. So what I always like to do is once I clean this all up, I'll come in here and put some brake grease on these areas. If you don't do that, the pad or the shoes have a tendency to squeak when you press on your brakes. So I always come in here and just put a little grease on these areas just to keep it from squeaking. Like you'll see, there's 3 spots on each shoe where they kind of rub. So you just put a little grease on there and a little grease on your wheel cylinder. Like anything that moves other than the surface, obviously. Anything that moves, it's a good idea to just kind of put some grease on there and just kind of keep it from squeaking, you know. You can really see, now that I've cleaned this up, you can really see the wear spots on here. So one thing you always want to do whenever you're replacing like drums and rotors is you want to take some brake parts cleaner and just clean your new parts. Like I just cleaned this brake drum. I mean, look at all the oil and just general goofery that was on just the inside of this brake drum. So just always, just clean your rotors and your brake drums and stuff before you reinstall them, because if you put this on and there's a good film of oil on there, the first thing it's going to do is glaze your pads, so your pads are not going to work. So you're like, oh, my brakes are kind of not brakey. Well, it's because you got all that oil and stuff glazed on the top of your shoes. So yeah, always clean your new brake components with a little bit of brake parts cleaner. You don't have to get all crazy about painting the whole backing plate or anything like that, but just kind of paint it around where your pads are going to rub together. And there's no way to adjust these manually on this car. There's no hole in the back of the backing plate where you just stick your little screwdriver in there and adjust it. These brakes are actually designed to where you put your car in reverse and then hit you reverse in your car, you hit the brakes, and it's supposed to adjust the brakes that way. I don't know how it works, but somebody smarter than me has figured that out. Alright, so we got the brakes all done. Everything's reassembled. You get a little grease on your little wear spots or whatever. So these brakes have this little adjuster down here. So this little armature right here somehow works where when you push on the brakes, it does something and it makes it adjust the brakes. But you have to set the initial adjustment. So what I always do is I just take my drum, stick it on. If you don't have enough resistance, screw it out a little bit till you get too much, then you come back a little bit. You just want it to just barely touch on the drum, just barely, and that's it. Then you could paint your drum if you want, because this is just raw metal, so it is gonna rust like the rest of this car. But yeah, that's all it is to it. Basically, drum brakes go back on the same way they came off. So if you have a huge issue, scared of drum brakes, one thing I learned is do one side at a time. So that way, if you screw this side up, you go over to the other side and be like, that's how it goes back together. Or if you get a really crappy car, somebody's already screwed up both sides, and then you end up like Googling stuff for 3 days trying to figure it out. But just do one side at a time, so that way you know, at least you got one reference point to get it all put back together. But we're gonna move on to the front now, which is gonna be a little bit easier than this. So yeah, stay tuned. So the front brakes, they're pretty self-explanatory. Take your caliper off, check it, make sure the piston's not stuck in there and it moves freely. Check your hose, make sure your hose is in good shape, it's not got any frays or anything in it. And then, check your wheel bearings, make sure your wheel bearings are good. Now is a great time to pull it apart and repack your bearings, even if they, are good. This rotor's pretty grooved up, so we're just going to replace it and the wheel bearings. And then obviously the pads. The caliper seems fine, the piston's moving pretty good. So yeah, we'll just pull this off, pull the rotor off, repack new bearings, new rotor, slap it back on there, and it should be good. The other side's just as bad, but yeah, this is kind of what you expect from a car that sits a lot. Car sit, the rotor gets rusty, and then you go drive it, and all it does is just groove up the rotor. So yeah, it happens. Hot rod stuff. But I'm gonna get this tore apart and then start assembling the new rotor. So what I'm gonna do now is just go ahead and pack up all my wheel bearings for both sides, so that way when I get done I can just change my gloves out. I don't have to worry about having all greasy fingers all over. So if you never packed a bearing before, you don't want to just smear some grease on the bearing and then slap it in there. You want to get the grease inside the rollers of the bearing. So the best way to do that, they make a tool for this too, but just take a little bit of grease in your hand, you just scoop it up into the bearing like that. So you just scoop it in there and you'll see it start coming out of the bearing. Boom. Now you just do this 4 more or 3 more times and you're good to go. Alright guys, so I've had a little technical difficulty with one of my cameras. I've got the front back together, so if you've ever screwed with spindles, front spindles and brake rotors, so when you're tightening your spindle nut, you don't want to over tighten it, because then you squish all the grease out of the bearings, and then you're, the whole packing the bearing thing that we did, you just undid all that. So what I always do is I just tighten the spindle up until there's no play in the spindle. You grab the spindle, rock it back and forth, and then get, tighten it up enough there's no play in it, and then most of the time you should be able to get the cotter key in there. But tighten it up, spin it around a few times, check it, make sure it's still tight, get your cotter key in, and just make sure it's not too tight. If you do tighten them up too much and you go driving on the road, it will either spit all the grease out, or sometimes if you get them way too tight, you can even catch, stuff on fire. But we've got it all finished. We've got all the brakes done on the car. The only thing left on this guy's list of things he wanted to fix on the car is the underhood light's not working, which I've discovered that somebody just cut the wire and then just hit it. So I've got to find where that wire goes and then splice it back together somehow. But yeah, so that's going to be about it for this car. So yeah, thanks for watching. Hit the subscribe button, leave us a comment, let me know what you think about this 88 Caprice Classic 4-door Grandma Special. Catch you guys on the next video.